Hello there, and welcome to the Fill in the Blank podcast. This is episode 4 of Fill in the Blank, and I'm Ross Strader, and I'm joined by my co-host, Keith Abels. And Fill in the Blank is a weekly discussion of how the technology of today impacts the world of tomorrow. And you can interact with us by sending us an email at fitbpodcast@gmail.com, or you can join the discussion on Twitter at hashtag AskFITB. Keith, man, I'm glad we're here doing this again.
Yeah, welcome back. Episode 4. I'm really glad to be back, and we've picked up a few listeners along the way, which is great. We've also picked up a new patron this week, so thank you to our new patron. Hey, speaking of that, if you'd like to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/FITB. So Patreon is patreon.com/FITB. That allows you to support us on your terms. So whatever you're capable of doing, we greatly appreciate your support. Patreon.com/FITB.
Yeah, so Patreon, and if you don't know anything about Patreon, take a moment and just at least go to the website and look at it. Patreon is one of the big players in the industry of how people, fund themselves and fund what they're doing these days. So at least educate yourself on Patreon. It would be worth doing that. Keith, so the last couple of weeks we've had some great topics. We talked about the future of the auto industry, the future of the smartphone. Last week, we had a discussion about what is a computer, and I know one of the things we do is we continue to follow these topics, kind of in our news feeds and what's out there from a reporting standpoint. And the last couple of times we've talked about Tesla, this, they're building these automated semis, self-driving semis, and it seems that every week since we talked about that, there's been something in the news. Did you saw something else this week?
Absolutely. This is the story that just keeps on giving. So for a show like ours, there's always something relevant. Last week, we talked about Anheuser-Busch, I should say, doing some pre-orders for the new Tesla truck. And that they go along with some of the other freight companies that have already signed on, including Walmart and DHL. This week, Pepsi, which is the second largest beverage distributor, PepsiCo, placed deposits for 100 of these trucks. It's $20,000 each for the deposit times 100. Now, to a company the size of Pepsi, that's probably not a whole lot. So the money is not as interesting as the commitment to 100 of these things. So that's a pretty significant order from yet another very large distribution company. So they continue on where Walmart. There's a Canadian grocery chain I see that also did this called Loblaws. I hope I'm pronouncing that properly. But there are a lot of folks getting on board with these new Tesla trucks.
It's interesting. So we're not just following this. There's a lot of people following what Tesla's doing and the future of that industry. And the big players, the folks that are logging lots of miles on the highways, transporting stuff interstate, man, they're interested in this and willing to take a gamble to see if it's something that would fit their companies or how they do business, how they distribute what they do. All right, so here, another thing, Keith, we were talking about, and this came from a suggestion of one of our listeners, and so we tossed it around and thought it'd be a great idea. So at the end of the show, we're going to be talking about, so be thinking, Keith, what's your pick of the week or something like that. So we don't want to call it pick of the week. That's already used. So we'd love for you to help us out with the name of this. But where we want to talk about something we came across this week as far as technology or our workflow or an app or, something out there that we came across that, man, we were really excited about and wanted to talk about. So we don't have a name for that. We're going to call it a segment in our show, and we don't have a name for it yet. So it's the idea of a pick of the week, but we need a better name. So give us some suggestions on a name at fitbpodcast@gmail.com, or just drop us a note on Twitter. You can put the hashtag AskFITB on there and let us know, hey, this would be a great name for your segment. So we'd love to have some help there. All right, Keith. So the topic for today's episode is the idea of the workplace, what work is going to look like in the future, and specifically the future of work. And so there's a lot of things being written right now about that, and AI seems to be one of the factors as people think about the future of work. So you've come across some of that. I know I've come across some of that. So before we get into it, when you think about the future of work, what comes to your mind?
Well, I think there's, with this particular topic, a lot of doom and gloom scenarios that people have in their heads. And while they are right to really think through how this will change work, our minds, I think, tend to go towards the negative and what kind of displacement does this cause, right? How many jobs does this eliminate? I would say that although we will certainly face some job loss and reductions in certain types of work, it's not all doom and gloom. And this is a really wide-ranging topic that covers way more than what we'll be able to cover today. And so this will be an ongoing discussion for us as well. But my advice to most people is don't get caught up in the techno panic that comes along with AI. And sometimes AI gets thrown around incorrectly. And this is nothing new. Artificial intelligence has been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
It is just now getting to the point where it is becoming consumerized, and we are introduced to this. Most consumers are introduced to this through Google and their Google Assistant on their phone, or Siri, or the Amazon lady in the can, those things, right? But try not to get caught up in the hype of all that, and try to do a little bit of background or some reading on this, and we'll link to a couple articles as well. It's not all doom and gloom, but the more you know, I think the better you'll be able to handle this as it comes on.
Yeah. So a lot of what people think about is, so some of the warnings out there are, hey, listen, as AI becomes self-learning, so do they, the way it's depicted in the apocalyptic type scenes is that AI takes on the life of itself and begins to want to, replace humanity. So you think of, Will Smith and iRobot and those sorts of things. But probably that's probably far more fiction than it is reality. And what in the short term, especially, folks have to come to terms with is how AI is going to be incorporated into the things they do. And in some cases, AI will be a competitor to what it is you do, what your job is. But more than that, how do we incorporate AI into our everyday life? How does it become something that's compatible with us? Almost as one article talks about, AI will become part of our co-working environment. So, Keith, I came across this article, How AI Will Continue Its Journey into the Mainstream in 2018. This is from VentureBeat. And so just one of the quotes from it and get your thought about it. So the vice president of AI technology of this accounting firm says this: every new report on AI and jobs sparks public outcry and highlights the need for deeper understanding into how advancements in AI will affect real jobs, talent, and workplaces. And while it's true that some positions will be replaced by AI technologies, many will evolve to incorporate and coexist with AI in a manner that optimizes benefit to a company. And I'd add there, not just to a company, but to an employee or to an entrepreneur. And that if you are slow to adapt, you certainly could get left behind.
Well, that sounds like a much better way of saying what I already said. So I tend to agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you think about the future of AI and how it will progress, and this article's focus particularly on 2018, so the next year, it makes the case that AI. So there's a lot out there, people trying to make robots for all different kinds of things. And so the AI trying to look and feel more human. But this article argues that the human-like novelty of AI is going to fade, and the real sort of benefit of AI will take the center stage.
I think, well, two things. Number one, we often conflate robots with intelligence. And that's not always the case.
Yeah, that's a good point.
You've seen for a while now that with robotics in particular, they have tried to humanize the robots that make sense to do that, or make sense in whoever's developing them, so that it kind of takes the edge off, or the creepiness factor off of anybody interacting with them. I think it kind of does the opposite, though. I think it makes it even more creepy.
Oh, absolutely.
So I'm all in favor of not necessarily trying to replicate humanity with robotic lookalikes.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've also got evidence of, we already mentioned voice assistants, and that's a really good example of not physically trying to replicate humans. But one thing they're trying to do, though, is the conversational nature is trying to replicate conversations of humans. And, for the most part, I think that's okay. There's actually a debate out there about whether you should use please and thank you when you're talking to your virtual assistants. And I don't know that there's a definitive answer, but one school of thought is when you do that, you are reinforcing the just general manners that you would like to reinforce in your kids,
Mm-hmm.
right? So because we will have a current generation of children growing up with these virtual assistants, it's another reason for us to teach them manners, right? So if you say, lady in the can, turn the lights on, you should say, lady in the can, please turn the lights on. Well, I don't really know where I fall on this because that's one school of thought. The other thought is that if you are teaching yourself or your kids to interact with these things this way, then there might be some psychology there where you're trying to convince yourself that they're real. Maybe it sends the wrong message to especially young minds. Maybe they do think that they're real, and then somewhere down the road that has some sort of negative consequence. I don't really know one way or the other. I don't know that there's a right or a wrong. I think for each person there's a right or wrong. That's probably a discussion for another time. But that already is an issue with how do we develop these things. So if it's a robot, for example, should we or should we not make them lifelike? Well, I don't know. It probably depends. Most of the time, I would say no, just because they're really creepy.
Yeah.
When it comes to voice assistants, like Siri or like the lady in the can or like the Google Assistant, I think it's okay because you need to be able to naturally converse,
Mm-hmm.
and it needs to understand you, and it needs to apply context, which is where the intelligence really comes in, and then respond accordingly. So for me, I think it's okay in a voice assistant. I'm not a fan of it in a robot.
Yeah. It does make sense. And so as you think about AI, one of that is, so we have this need for it to be conversational. And so there's probably two reasons for that, and you're bringing up those same points. So one of the reasons we need it to be conversational, because if not, we end up having to learn a new language to communicate with AI. So if we have to learn, these set of commands and all of these things, that you end up learning a new language. It was kind of like when you had the old, Palm Pilots, and you had to almost learn a new script. You know what I'm saying, when you were going to write on it.
Are you referring to graffiti?
I'm referring. Man, I'm glad you said. I've totally forgot. And if we go back to episode 2, I think you're the one that said hieroglyphics is the language of the future. And so
Emoji.
Yeah, emoji. That's right. Emoji. That's right. But there's a need for it to be conversational so that AI is adapting to how we normally communicate. And again, it's that whole conversation about how do we eliminate friction. So part of it being conversational is eliminating friction. And I'm sure what drives this idea of AI being housed in something that looks more human, there is this sense in which that eliminates more. The thought is that would eliminate friction. I think what we're seeing is it probably won't ever get to a place, maybe not in our near lifetime, that it's not creepy. It looks weird. Of course, I don't know we ever want to get to a time where you can't tell the difference between a human and something that's artificial. But I think the other thing about conversation, though, is the conversational aspect. If more people are going to adopt AI in the workplace and, in their home environment, it's got to be, so the conversation draws you in. So if it's easy to say, hey, lady in the can, or hey, the Apple gal, and speak their name, and the response time is pretty quick, it draws us into that being more a part of our, more part of the ebb and the flow of the things we do. And so conversations, one of those things I think becomes an on-ramp for more people using that, as part of the technology and what they're doing.
Oh, for sure. I think the natural entry is certainly the voice assistant, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And the other, so it's interesting. When you talk about it in the workplace, so I know you're already seeing, studies come out and people are talking about, but not near as much as I think they'll talk about it at the end of 2018, is, the idea of what exactly should AI be for? So, man, if it's a virtual assistant in your home and, helps you navigate to a television station or keeps a to-do list or you find a recipe or plays a song, that's one thing. But when it moves into, does this become a replacement for, relationship and human contact? Just to what degree is that AI in our homes or even in the workplace going to be, somebody you could have a conversation with that maybe kept you from, interacting relationally?
Well, I hope it doesn't replace human interaction. As antisocial as I am, just personally, I know that interaction with other people actually is a good thing for me.
It is.
Right? It's necessary. As much as I don't like to admit that, there are times where I can feel like, okay, I need to get out of my cave and go interact with other people. That will be good for me. Also, the sun's out. That's probably good too. So I hope that we don't get to that point. My hope here is that we get to a point, and this will probably have to come from the kids of today growing up with this and probably their kids. I'm thinking that we will go through this transition where you've got a couple of generations that are still alive that just outright resist this altogether, right? They're terrified and they resist. Then you have kind of the in-between generations, and that may be our generation, maybe one or two generations that, says, okay, well, this is, bound to happen, so I might as well kind of get on board with it. And they just, do it, or, they kind of go along with whatever they need to go along with just to kind of make it through the world. And then you've got kids that will grow up with AI being part of pretty much everything that they do. And the way that they interact with that and then with each other will kind of dictate, what happens from there, right? Whether this reduces social interaction or improves social interaction. So, if you look at something, if you look at social networks, for example, and it doesn't matter if it's Facebook or Twitter, but if you look at social networks, the great hope for social networks is it would bring all these people together, and it would, so you'd be able to communicate and keep tabs with your friends and family all over the world, and it will be just this big love fest. And for some people, that's what it is. For most people, it is not. For most people, I think you would say Facebook almost kind of brings out the worst in people. So not only does that not give you the type of interaction that a lot of people are looking for, but then it also prevents you from having real interactions with people. And you see that if you walk into a restaurant and everybody's looking down at their phone. I'm not judging. I do this all the time too. So I'm not saying people are bad for doing this. I am just as guilty. We're all guilty of that. But, it to me, I really hope the next generation figures this out. We are the in-betweeners where you've lived life before this and you will live life after this. And so I don't think we're the best, the current generation. If you look at the 20s to the 40s, people that are in their 20s to the 40s right now, those are what I would kind of consider the in-betweeners.
Mm-hmm.
And I may not be exactly right on that age range, but somewhere in there. And then you've got, teens and preteens especially, or even, the kids that are being born now. I hope that their level of interaction is different in a good way than ours. So I had this theory. There's several years ago, I was listening to This Week in Google on the Twit network. And Jeff Jarvis, who's a professor at the City University of New York, he's a weekly co-host of that show. And I follow him on Twitter. And their conversation was about something similar to this, how growing up with the web and growing up with your entire life being online, how that changes over time. And it was one of the few times I actually sent somebody, a message after listening to one of those shows. And I was using Google Plus at the time. Another throwback there to the things that, well, technically exist, but nobody uses it anymore. And so I actually sent him a message on Google Plus. And my thought at the time kind of matches up here. My thought was that I think that if you grow up with your entire life online, or my hope is that because everyone's life is very visible from day one at this point, that we as a society would become more forgiving and more empathetic, because everyone will have gone through those types of things at some point in their life, to where whatever is online is not the most positive or the most favorable thing, right? So over time, as that becomes the norm, then my hope was that we would be much better at dealing with that and a lot less judgmental. And he actually did reply. I was very impressed that he replied. And it was something to the effect of, I agree with you and I hope you're right. Yeah. Something like that. So I appreciated the reply. So I think the same thing here. I would apply that same thing here, that my hope is that the people going through the transition, or the in-betweeners like us, we figure out all the bad ways or the wrong ways to do this, so that we set that example for the next generation and they say, oh, here's what we're going to do, and do it better. That's my hope. It's
got to be. So, I think you talked about it brings out the worst. And what's so maybe paradoxical about it is, social media is one of those places everyone wants to look their best. And so you expend a lot of social media energy on looking your best and presenting the very best snapshots of you. And yet the result is it brings out the worst in everybody. And so if we can move past kind of that tension where it does really become more authentic, where you're engaging with people in social media much more like you would, regularly. So, you go to have lunch or you go to have coffee, even you and I, so we'll sit down and have a cup of coffee, and man, maybe you hadn't had the best day or I had the best day, and you can't hide, those things about you that bring out frustration or, bring out your negativity and that sort of thing. And there is, and because of that, I think there's this give and take. I mean, that's how we mature. That's how we become our best selves. And if AI becomes a place where people substitute relational needs with some AI technology, you have a dynamic where there's no take in that AI relationship. The AI only gives, and that becomes an incredibly powerful tool for the powers that be behind the AI, and they can shape values that way. They can direct culture that way. And I don't think we want AI to do that.
No, we don't. We absolutely don't. On the other hand, there's plenty of humans that I don't want doing that too. So, I guess it depends.
That's probably true.
On who's doing that. And I don't know that we would all ever agree on that, which is also probably good that we don't. So back to the work part.
Yeah, let's talk about the work part. So this is Fill in the Blank Podcast, FITB podcast at gmail.com. Gosh, we'd love for you to join the discussion, or you can meet us out at Twitter at hashtag AskFITB, and we can pick up the conversation there. But like you said, Keith, we're really here to talk about, the future of work and what the landscape moving forward with AI as it integrates into the workplace looks like, and how we'll interact and adapt to that.
There was a book I read a while back, and I've read several books on this particular topic, and I'm probably not going to properly credit each one of them individually. The one that I'll refer to now is called The Inevitable by Kevin Kelly. And in The Inevitable, he goes through a lot of different topics, but A couple that stood out when we talk about artificial intelligence and kind of the freak out factor, the panic factor that people are going through now, they often relate that to the previous waves of technology that have created displacement in the workforce. A really good example is the Industrial Revolution. And that's what drove people off of farms and into cities and into factories and those sorts of things, right? So you had machinery replacing raw manpower.
Yeah, it was technology that changed the world.
It did. It certainly did. And it has certainly shaped the world that we live in now. And so a couple of points that I would make. One is, at the time, all that people could see was the amount of jobs that were going to go away. You couldn't really see all the jobs that would be created because of it. So, for example, if now you have a machine on a farm that can do the work of 10 men, well, you don't need those 10 men. Where do they go work now? And it's entirely possible those 10 men could go work or would go now work in a factory to where they assist these machines that are also assisting them. And it's like you're co-working, which gets back to your how do we kind of co-work with artificial intelligence. So there's one example, and I think you could probably find other examples in there as well. But so you've got that component to it, right? So it's easy to see the jobs that will go away. It's hard to see the jobs that are created.
Yeah.
That is something that you can apply now. So that's one point. A second point, though, is that unlike those previous waves of technological improvement and work displacement, most of those were related to machines replacing manpower. They weren't related necessarily to machines replacing brain power. And that's a big difference. So there is an element to this particular change that is different than the previous waves of change. So what we don't know, we know what happens when mechanical machines that can do the work of multiple people. We know how that impacts things because we've been through that now multiple times. What we don't know is what happens when machines with intelligence that can now do thought work, because those are the jobs that most people think are safe through the rise of robots, the rise of automation, machines, and all those sorts of things, that thought workers will be okay. But I don't know that that's entirely true for a couple of reasons. I forget which books I read these in, so I'll just throw them out there. And, if somebody remembers what book I read them from, then please correct me. But there was I believe it was an insurance company in Japan that eliminated all of their kind of mid-level managers that were processing claims. And they might not have even been managers, but they were claims processors that were reviewing cases and then deciding the outcome, right? And that's a pretty common thing that an insurance company would do. So you submit your claim, somebody reviews it, and they decide based on their policies and your policies and all that good stuff, what to do about that. We're going to pay it, we're going to deny it, whatever. But there's nothing really terribly unique about those claims after you've seen enough of them, right? You've seen kind of every example, and you can apply some basic intelligence to that decision-making process. And then you don't need the people to do that anymore. And as a customer now, my claim gets processed much faster and probably more accurately, for good or for bad. I mean, we are talking about insurance companies here. So there's one example of thought workers, which we once thought would be protected, that now maybe they're not.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And so part of what you're saying is, as AI sort of finds its place in the workplace, part of that is that AI is still in the design phase. I mean, exactly what it's going to look like, or what the different versions of it are going to look like across different industries or different aspects of lifestyle. And so one of the things that gets threatened when you think about thought work, or you think about as people prepare to go into the workplace, it probably has an impact on even education. So you think about, you want to go be an electrical engineer, you want to go you go to school, you spend 4 years, you study, you prepare yourself for an industry with all of its language and the skills that it takes to do that kind of work at that kind of level, because it was only humans, only human brains that were making those decisions or drawing those designs or solving those problems. But if you have AI enter the industry where you flip a switch and that AI has the capability to do what it takes somebody 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 years to be able to master through education and apprenticeship and all that stuff, it changes education. So now you have to learn, okay, what is the place, what is the role for an engineer in that environment? What's the role for a medical profession in that environment? So even now, surgery today is vastly different than surgery was 30 years ago. And
thank goodness.
Absolutely, thank goodness. But now you go, you're learning as much as a surgeon how to work with the tools that have been introduced into the profession as you are, all the other things that needed to be learned before that.
Sure. So another good example of this I'll give you is lawyers. There are numerous legal startups at this point that will take your case, and they don't have, a big staff of lawyers. They probably have a handful. But your case or your argument, however you submit it to them, is primarily evaluated by AI. And then it gives you an expected outcome based on the entire history of case law as it's recorded that it can process in a very short period of time and apply the correct parameters. So what type of case is this? Where is it being filed? Because that geography matters, right? So cases in this part of the world or this part of a particular country usually end this way when they've got these variables. So if you think about it like that, if you think about a lawsuit or a case that's filed, all of them over the course of the history of recorded law can be used to measure how your case would fare, right?
Yeah.
So, and it can do it relatively quickly because it can process all of these prior cases and measure yours against it. Law is based on precedent. So you've got defined laws, you've got precedent, you've got all these other factors that go into it. And if you've got some intelligence that's designed to kind of process against that, then you've got a pretty good probability of knowing what the outcome of that case is.
Right.
And so based on that, these startups can then take your case, not take your case, give you maybe an estimate. I don't know how they work the financial model. If it's less than 50%, you don't pay. I don't know. But I'm sure there's a business case to be made there. The point is that is taking what used to take people years of studying law school. And then when you get out of law school, you go work as a low-level person at a firm or whatever, and you kind of work your way up. But you're talking about years of experience and knowledge replaced by AI. But it doesn't mean that legal work goes away. It means that how you do legal work drastically changes, and the people that support legal work have to change.
Yeah.
Which I think was your point at the beginning. How do we work side by side? You could also say the same thing about a lot of medical jobs. Mm-hmm. So there's some... If you consider now that you've got an app on your phone that lets you talk to a doctor and you put in all your symptoms and it kind of spits out a result, think about intelligence that's designed to access the entire recorded human history of medicine and what we know, right? And then you can localize that because obviously if I have, when you go to the doctor, if you have a certain type of illness or situation, they'll often ask you if you've been outside the country, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good question because they need to know because there are certain things that you are at risk for when you are in certain parts of the world. And so if you've been outside of the country, you need to tell them where you've been, and then that has to be part of their diagnosis. So that is one small example, put together all the other questions they would normally ask you. And why can't intelligence that's designed to do that kind of do some of the heavy lifting. So that it's kind of insane that you would expect a doctor to be able to take all of those variables and accurately diagnose you. And then over time, machines can spot things faster, or I should say AI can spot things faster, maybe trends that are developing in a certain geographic area or something like that. But again, that doesn't mean doctors go away. This gets back into, I don't want a robot that looks like a doctor.
Right.
That would be super creepy. I want a person that can empathize and that can tell me and guide me through this process.
Yeah.
But the way that you support that industry becomes a lot different if you've got intelligence kind of at the heart of that doing diagnoses. What's the right word?
Yeah.
If you've got, right, so you've got a machine doing it, or you've got AI helping you with that. And then you've got humans that are taking the part that we are good at and that machines and animatronics and those types of things are terrible at and are not going to be good at. So those are two examples that I think previously people would say those jobs are immune from this type of thing. And that is vastly different than machines replacing farmers, machines replacing factory workers.
Yeah, I think you're right. So you've got this. So what you're talking about is one, the possibilities that intelligence, like AI intelligence, artificial intelligence brings to the table. Maybe the diagnostics, the ability to understand trends in ways from an intelligence standpoint, we have limits, but at the same time, you turn that around. What AI can't do is bring, passion and intuition and those sorts of things. So you just think about law for a minute. What you don't want is, decisions moving forward in case law that only have to do with precedent. You still want there to be the element of human influence, where we mature as a society. We adapt as a society based upon the influence of humans, good or bad. I mean, so that that can go either way. But you wouldn't want to pick one mark in history and say, okay, we're going to, from this standpoint, only rely on logical intelligence that machines do, and then everything from this point after, there's no growth, there's no change, there's no human influence no longer plays a part in the areas of law or medicine or even in the development of technology. I mean, so right now that, you have AI that has the ability to, my wife just sent me a link today. So it, they analyzed all the Harry Potter story, all the words, all this stuff, feed it into machines, and the predictive, was it predictive text, writes a Harry Potter chapter, which isn't good, but it is readable. There's coherence to it. And you can have programs that write programs, but you wouldn't want to do that without things like, what are core values at the bottom of that? How is that regulated? What's the accountability? And those are things that have to get worked out, that right now the technology's kind of ahead of having thought through all the consequences, all the, what does this mean? How do we, what are the limits and that sort of thing?
I 100% agree. And if you let machines think about how everything should be structured and how we build it, the first thing they would do is eliminate humans, because we are terribly inefficient. We screw up a lot of things all the time, and they would just get rid of us.
Absolutely.
And in their mind, if they're optimized for efficiency, then you get rid of inefficiency.
So one of the things that have to be accounted for is, and I know that, as this writer talks about 2018 and where we're going in the future, is it also can't just be one segment of the world that has access to AI. There have to be people that care about if AI is going to be integrated, and how does it get integrated in places that it's not already integrated. So maybe that's segments of society, or maybe that's parts of the world, but you you wouldn't want to, so right now we have things like, rich and poor divide us, and but you wouldn't want a technology and access to technology to create greater chasms that are already there.
I agree. I'm not sure how we bridge the gap, but I'm hopeful that we do.
Oh, it has to be bridged, and I think that's the responsibility of, so technology becomes a part of what defines a developing nation, and developing nations have to look for ways to bring other nations and countries and continents along, so that I think, gosh, I don't know, maybe that says too much about my view, but that nobody gets left behind in that, because if they do, then those chasms are so hard to bridge once they get built. So you build one kind of a bridge, and man, it's hard to tear that bridge down and build another bridge.
I agree. Unfortunately, I don't know that history is on our side here. And two things. Number one, the internet was supposed to be the great liberator.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the equalizer. And to a certain extent, it has. But even today, there are big chunks of the world that have no access.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
getting better. And then I'll point back to something we talked about earlier. Social networks were designed to do the same thing, bringing the world together, right? And so both of those, sadly, all of this, in any new technology, even designed with the best of intentions, can be weaponized.
Yeah.
And we've seen the internet weaponized. We've seen social media weaponized. And that's just the nature of everything. And so the question would be, how do we minimize the potential weaponization of AI?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about, Terminator type stuff where the robots are just come back and kill us all, or the Matrix where we just all turn into batteries. Sorry if you haven't seen the Matrix. Spoiler alert. But I really hope that we figure that out sooner than later, because I fear that you're right. If we don't build these things with that in mind, it's going to just happen, and then it's going to be very difficult to overcome it.
Right. Well, and if social media is any guide, you see what social media has done to deteriorate kind of the social infrastructure, that used to be in place, and that, maybe it's my age, maybe it's the place. It's a social infrastructure that I think has lots of value in people becoming their best selves. And so as we think about technology today that impacts the world tomorrow, we wouldn't want technology in all of the things that it brings that are to the good. The ability to step into places and help with complex problems that we don't have the capacity to do. But you wouldn't want to sacrifice sort of the value of the social and relational infrastructures, even in the workplace. And so, what kind of human resource department values and accountability does AI have related to, human employees? So, and how does HR deal with the complexities of AI and, humans as coworkers? And there's, that's a whole host of questions that have to get answered as AI continues to be integrated into the things that we do. If not, we'll end up having industries like couples therapy with AI. You know what I'm saying? You take your lady in the box to the therapist with you and say, hey, we're not getting along. And we certainly don't want to do that. And you go walk into the therapist and you decide, do you want a human therapist or do you want an AI therapist? And so we certainly don't want to get into that kind of world.
Well, I did have a therapist once when I was young that I don't think was human. So we may have already been there.
Yeah, and a lot of school teachers too, right?
Exactly.
Hey, Keith, this has been a great discussion. And actually, man, we just scratched the surface. And with a topic like, man, how does the future of work look? What does the future of the workplace look like? We found ourselves in conversation that certainly was work related, but more than that, really just sort of, man, what are the ethics and the values moving forward as technology moves into all of these areas of our lives in different and more sophisticated ways. So we're going to have to pick this topic up again sometime in the future, and maybe we can talk more specifically about the workplace, but either way, it's been a good discussion.
I agree. Yeah, this is not a one and done conversation. This is one, much like our self-driving car topic, it will keep coming up over and over and over again. And I would be really curious what our listeners think about this particular topic, and then what types of AI impacts are important to you. So, I mean, this touches all levels of work, of society, and I'd be very curious to hear what's on folks' mind and what you'd like to hear us talk about and what your opinions are.
Yeah, absolutely. That helps. I mean, this can be part of that solution of, man, we want human interaction. So, man, what kinds of things are you reading? What are your thoughts? What are your opinions about this? And maybe even how have you brushed up against this topic in your own life or your own work? So please let us know what you know. So you can email us at fitbpodcast@gmail.com, or you can send us a message or shoot us a link to something you've read on Twitter with a hashtag AskFITB. All right, so this is the new segment of our show, Keith. So week 4, we're introducing a new segment. We're the placeholder for what the segment's called right now is the pick of the week, although we really would love for you to help us with a better name there. Keith, what'd you come across this week that, man, you absolutely fell in love with, or you're dying to make sure everybody knows about?
All right, so it's an app. It's an iOS app.
Okay.
And it is called Workouts Plus Plus. So it's got the plus sign, right? So Workouts Plus Plus.
Okay, wait a minute.
The cool thing about this.
Wait. Is this like a fitness thing? Are you about to like fitness shame me?
It is a fitness app, but I'm not going to talk about why I like it in terms of fitness.
Oh, okay,
all right. So it is a fitness app. I've used it a little bit. It has some nice fitness stuff, but here's why I like it. Remember my Apple Watch with the red dot?
Oh yes, you have the Apple Watch that announces that you're an early adopter.
Yes, I've got the red dot Apple Watch.
Yes.
So one of the things that I really wanted to achieve by getting my new red dot Apple Watch was I wanted to be able to go for a walk or run, bike ride, whatever, put my AirPods in, just have my Apple Watch and go hit the road.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that with music. So you can either stream music using Apple Music. I don't think any other music services are supported at this time. Hopefully down the road they are. So you can either stream music over the cellular network, or you can just download music from your phone to your watch and off you go. So music works great. So you can already leave the house, not have your phone. You can just take your watch and your AirPods and go have fun.
Okay.
However, I listen to a lot of podcasts, as you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really hoping that I could do the same thing with podcasts. But Apple's standalone podcast app does not support this. So there's no podcast app for the Apple Watch that you can just open and just stream a podcast.
Yeah.
And there's not really many. I came across one, and it was terribly slow at transferring your podcast over to your watch. It was slow. It was very unreliable. Didn't really work that well. I technically got it to work, but not a great experience. So here's where this workout app comes in. I don't know why it's better in a workout app, but it does. So there is, in this Workouts Plus Plus, there is a podcast section of Workouts Plus Plus that allows you to either stream over cellular a podcast or download it fairly easily onto your Apple Watch so that I can go for a walk or run or bike ride with just my watch, just my AirPods, and listen to my podcasts.
Really?
So it seems like this is a problem that needs to be solved pretty quickly by somebody. As I understand it, the way that Apple has built the Apple Watch and support for podcasts, it's not great. So that's the reason why I guess nobody's built a standalone podcast app for the Apple Watch. And Apple's own standalone podcast app does not support streaming over cellular through the watch or downloads at this point. I'm hoping they correct that as well. So Workouts Plus allows me, I tested it and it works. I've tested it by downloading and I've tested it by streaming. And it allows me to listen to my podcast. So I have just my AirPods and just my Apple Watch with the red dot. And I can go hit the road and take my podcast with me. So that's my pick of the week, Workout Plus.
Man, that's great. So you can download onto the Apple Watch. How much space does your Apple Watch have for download? Can you get one or two podcasts in it, or does it have...
Oh, you can get quite a few.
Okay.
I forget the exact storage of the Apple Watch, but you can store, I've got quite a few playlists from Apple Music stored on my Apple Watch.
Okay.
And then you can, take a couple of shows with you. The beauty of the fancy red dot Apple Watch, though, is you don't technically have to download them. You can stream them.
Man, that's...
So I'm on an unlimited data plan. My watch is just part of my data plan. So you don't have to worry about data. And most people have unlimited data plans at this point, or close enough to unlimited to where a podcast isn't going to be that big of a deal. And just take it with you. So there's one of the benefits of the red dot Apple Watch.
All right. So one of these podcasts pretty shortly, I'm going to get you into a conversation about your red dot Apple Watch and see if you can talk me into to making that switch. So, all right. Well, hey, this is, and by the way, I don't have a pick of the week this week, but I will next week. I will definitely come back next week. I've got one that I'm tinkering with, but I'm not sure I love it yet. I'm not sure I'm ready to endorse it. Well, this has been episode 4 of Fill in the Blank, and we are very grateful that you've been listening and will continue to listen. We hope that you will. And you can communicate with us because we'd love to hear from you at fitbpodcast@gmail.com or on Twitter, #AskFITB. And we'll be back next week with episode 5. Keith, sign off for us.
All right. Final reminder. Thank you to our patrons. If you haven't signed up yet, there's always time. Patreon.com/FITB. It allows you to support us on your terms. So if you're able, we would greatly appreciate the support. Patreon.com/FITB. And a reminder that we are available. If you're listening to us now, you've obviously found us somewhere. We're available in the Apple Podcast app. We're available in the Google Play Store and most podcast apps. And this week, we were officially added to Spotify. So if you use Spotify, there is a podcast section there that you can find Fill in the Blank as well. We put this show on YouTube. It's an audio version of the show on YouTube, so you can find us there at the Fill in the Blank channel. So we're trying to make access very easy for folks. And again, if you're able to support us, please do so. Patreon.com/FITB.
Thanks for listening.